Right now, I'm recording with the brand new DJI Action 5 Pro. Pro is what is new this year because there is a slew of new features that at first glance, when you look at the camera kind of looks the same, but as you dive into it, there's some pretty nice updates here. Now, the big question I always try to answer when these new action cameras come out is why use this when I always have my phone with me, and with the 15 Pro and also 16 Pro, I can use ProRes video that looks extremely good. I use it all the time personally. Why do I even need a dedicated camera anymore when what's in my pocket can already do it? And well, the answer for that has always been form factor. The fact that a dedicated action camera is much more rugged, it's much smaller. I can put it in places that I maybe wouldn't want to put my phone. So there are use cases for it. But at least in my opinion, image quality has always been the weakest point of an action camera. They have been getting better and better. Like the Action 4, I think looks great, but it still was not what I would love from a small camera like this, where I think like actually an iPhone looks better. But now with the Action 5 Pro, some of the changes they've made make that delta much, much smaller. To me, the biggest update by far on the Action 5 Pro is image quality and the updates to it. This has a brand new 1/1.3 inch sensor, which is same as last year in terms of size, but they've clearly tweaked it and adjusted it because I think the image quality looks significantly better. And that comes in two different ways. The biggest feature is that this now has 13.5 stops of dynamic range, which is great for an action camera. They've always tried to do these tricks by using HDR modes, using different log modes. And for the most part, they do, they work, they look pretty good. But when you compare this to last generation's Action 4, which you're seeing now, there is a noticeable difference, and really what that comes to is the highlight retention. So take this for example, I've got both the Action 5 and the Action 4 next to each other. It's a pretty bright environment, and these cameras handle that pretty well. But then if I kind of tilt over here and look at the sun, I mean, is it a huge difference? Maybe not. Like, is anyone going to notice it? Probably not in the final product, but for someone that likes to edit this footage and adjust it, what you can see is that the sun on the 4 is a little bit more blown out, whereas on the 5, you can kind of just see the dot of where the sun is. And that's one of my favorite tests for dynamic range, is just pointing it at the sun, because then you can really see how it handles it. And also just in the non-bright areas, how is it handling, me as a subject? I feel like the shadows are also a little bit more enhanced and preserved. I don't know, you tell me, but I think it looks pretty good. But besides that dynamic range, which huge step, they've also clearly adjusted the image processing that you get out of this camera. Because if you again, look at the Action 4, put it next to the Action 5, these images just look completely different. And it feels like the roll off and the transition between darks and lights is what makes the biggest difference here. It's much more smooth and gradient, even when I have these cameras in exactly the same settings, or as close as they can be anyways. There is a noticeable difference here, and it makes using this camera and matching it with different cameras I own, like my Canon C70 or my R5, which actually I think has about the same amount of dynamic range when I use C-Log1, which is kind of crazy to think about, but when I can now match it a lot easier. And I don't know, to me, this is a big deal, and it's like the reason why this camera exists, at least in my opinion. Now for the other, features on the image quality side, this is still a 155-degree field of view, so it's super wide. It has 10 bits in both the normal mode and the log mode, which is great, and it has D-Log-M, which is what I shoot everything in on these cameras because I like to have the most control possible, and that's kind of where you can get the most dynamic range, which again, I think is important here. It can shoot 4K at 120 FPS, which, works great. Not something I personally use all that often, but for an action camera, those slow motion modes are important. That's probably something I'm never going to use, but let me know if you think it looks good, and maybe it's worth it. I call this the creature comfort section because none of it is really necessary. You could get away with not having it, but once you have it, it's hard to go back, and it, I think, makes it a much more pro camera. It just makes it easier to use in a lot of different ways. And one of the big changes here is the OLED screens, both on the front and the back. These screens they look great. I didn't really think I cared about the screen quality on an Action camera, but when you put this next to the Action 4, it is a big difference. Now, again, it's a creature comfort. Does it matter for the day-to-day use? No, but I like these screens a lot. They're super bright, they have good contrast, and theoretically, maybe it could be better for battery life, although I wouldn't exactly count on that. But the screens look great. Now there are a ton of other, pros, creature comfort features that make this camera just much more easy to use. There is time code built in, the gyro data, it can all be saved so you can use it for post-processing. There's Wi-Fi 6, you can use it as a webcam, and it also has a barometer and hydrostatic recording built in. So not only can it, detect the altitude that you are at if you want that data, but also if you are using this in the water, it can automatically detect when the camera is underwater. And what's great about this, like let's say you are diving with it, as soon as you come up and it detects that it is no longer underwater, it'll just stop the recording so you don't have to worry about it anymore if you want. Another huge update that I absolutely love is that this now has internal storage. So I don't need my SD card. I can always go out and start shooting, because I can't tell you how many times I've gone out with one of these cameras and forgot to put that little micro SD card into it, because I just don't use micro SD cards all that often, so I forget sometimes. So inside it has a 64 gigabyte capacity, and 45 of that is usable for recording footage, and then you also have the option to still just use an SD card. So what I do is I just put my random SD card in there, never really touch it because I'm not using it, but I record everything internally, and that way I have both options just in case. You just plug it in your computer and offload everything. Super easy, super functional. These, creature comforts, like I said, make this camera feel much more usable. And when I'm thinking about what action camera I want, it makes me want to pick this one up over a lot of the other options. So if you're planning to use this a lot, those things, they come in handy. In the last few years, DJI has been making a big push into their ecosystem. If you use DJI products, it seems they're trying to make them interoperable in ways that are just much more usable and much more efficient. For instance, one of the big features here that I love, and for DJI products going forward, it is a must, and that's that this is now a receiver for DJI Mic 2. So if you see, I'm recording into that right now, but it's not transmitting to anything else or even recording internally. Instead, it is going straight to the camera. And this is a real receiver. It's not just doing Bluetooth audio, which it can do as well. It is recording high quality audio, and I can control everything. It has 32-bit float. I can trigger it to record both internally on the camera and also internally on here, so that I have dual, recording options for backup. That is a huge plus and makes vlogging with this camera much easier, because I get great quality audio here. But that push into the DJI ecosystem, it's a big deal, and the convenience is certainly there. So yeah, I think the Action 5 Pro is at the top of the list when it comes to action cameras these days. If you are in the market for a camera like this, it's kind of hard to beat some of those pro features, because you get the great image quality with the action camera form factor. And for me, at least, I know when I'm going out places that maybe are a little bit more rugged or a little bit more, sketchy, I don't want to put my phone in danger all that often. So this is probably the place to look.